My grandpa once told me about an encounter he had with a yokai when he was young. It was a life-taking yokai known as a Kubire-oni. This happened when he had just turned 20, so it was about 70 years ago. Yokai, it seems, still appeared even after Japan entered the Showa era. That day, he was hurrying along an unpaved country road, his geta clacking, to attend a neighborhood association meeting. As he approached the foot of the bridge over the nearby big river, the fabric toe post of his geta snapped. Oh no, he thought. I'm already halfway there. I can't go back home to change my geta now. If only I had a tenugai with me, I could easily fix this toe post in no time. People of his generation, Grandpa explained, always carried these thin hand towels as they were handy for various quick fixes, including repairing geta straps. As he was pondering this, suddenly a voice called out from behind. Grandpa was startled and couldn't help but cry out. Until then, there had been no one around, and there was nowhere to hide. The voice had come out of nowhere. Grandpa turned around and let out another small cry. Right behind him stood an eerie old woman in a strange kimono. She was slightly shorter than Grandpa, but her head was abnormally large. Her head was about 1/3 of her total height, an impossibly large size. Her big eyes, bloodshot and slanted upwards, were about the size of a human head. It was impossible to tell her age, but her face was etched with deeper wrinkles than any old woman Grandpa had ever seen before. Yet she didn't appear frail at all. Her hair was tied up on top, but the lower part was mostly undone and disheveled. Perhaps trying to appear friendly, she pursed her lips, which were split to her ears, into a small shape and spoke in an oddly cute voice. Prithee, art thou in straits? Grandpa couldn't understand what the old woman was saying. He recognized it as some form of archaic language, but couldn't grasp its meaning. However, seeing her holding out a tenugoi and repeatedly offering it to him, he guessed she was asking if he was in trouble. May I tear this tenugi? Grandpa asked, and the eerie old woman nodded her huge head up and down. Well then, if you don't mind, Grandpa said as he took the tenugi, tore the edge, twisted it into a cord, and made a new toe post. After fixing his geta, Grandpa said, "Thank you very much," and tried to return the tenugi, but the old woman gripped his hand tightly, immobilizing him. From this point on, Grandpa's head started to feel fuzzy, as if he were in a dream. He felt like he talked with the old woman about something, but he couldn't remember what they discussed. Suddenly, he heard the old woman's voice near his ear saying, "Verily, 'tis a covenant," and Grandpa snapped back to his senses. He found himself linking pinkies with the old woman, as if making some kind of promise. The old woman leaned her huge head closer and said once more, "Verily, 'tis a covenant," to Grandpa. Verily, 'tis a covenant. Though it was archaic language, Grandpa understood the meaning. It's surely a promise. Grandpa thought, this is bad. It seems I've made some kind of promise with this old woman without understanding what's going on. He tried to run away, but the pinky promise with the old woman wouldn't come undone. The old woman said, "Forsooth thou hast pledged," again slightly opening her large mouth as if smiling. Just as Grandpa was being reminded, it's surely a promise, you know. He couldn't remember what he had promised at all. The old woman gripped Grandpa's wrist, which was tightly bound in the pinky swear, with her other hand and separated their link-coat pinkies as if tearing them apart. There was a faint ripping sound, and a sharp pain shot through Grandpa's little finger. Ouch! Grandpa couldn't help but let out a cry, and when he looked at his little finger, blood was flowing from the pad. The old woman brought Grandpa's hand to her mouth. From between her thinly parted lips emerged a large, fluttering tongue tip, reminiscent of a flounder's tail fin. It slowly rasped against Grandpa's little finger once, then twice, lapping up the blood with its rough surface. "Aye, 'tis passing sweet," the old woman said. In other words, truly delicious. She grinned as she spoke these words. As she did so, the inside of her mouth became fully visible. On her purplish gums, sharp fangs thicker than fingers were arranged like a jumble of steaks. Grandpa wanted to run away, but his feet felt glued to the ground. and he couldn't even raise his voice. The old woman now brought her own little finger to Grandpa's mouth. From the pad of the old woman's rough, dry little finger, a jet-black liquid was oozing out. It was probably blood, but it was unlike any blood Grandpa had ever seen before. The old woman forcefully pushed her gnarled, thick little finger into Grandpa's mouth. An incredible bitterness and fishy smell spread through his mouth, making him gag involuntarily. At that moment, a gust of wind blew up, raising a cloud of dust, and Grandpa instinctively turned his face away and closed his eyes. When he opened his eyes again, the old woman was already gone. Grandpa hastily left the place. When Grandpa arrived at the venue for the neighborhood association meeting, the party was already in full swing. As he moved from table to table, exchanging greetings and sharing drinks with everyone, the memory of the old woman completely slipped from his mind. As the gathering was nearing its end, the chairman came to sit next to Grandpa and asked, "How are things going at work lately?" This chairman was the community leader, trusted by residents to handle all sorts of small consultations. In fact, it was thanks to the chairman's recommendation that Grandpa had secured his current job. While they were drinking and chatting, the chairman suddenly pointed at Grandpa's hand and asked, "What happened there?" Looking down, Grandpa saw a deep cut on the little finger of his right hand, which was holding the sock cup. There was no blood, but he could see the flesh inside. It seemed like the kind of wound that should have been quite painful, yet he had no memory of it. "What's with that bewildered look on your face? Where did you get hurt?" the chairman asked. Such a severe injury, yet Grandpa couldn't recall where he had gotten it. "Come on, you're saying you don't even remember where you got hurt?" The chairman laughed, but seeing Grandpa's genuinely perplexed face, he suddenly furrowed his brow. "You haven't made a promise with something unsavory, have you?" The moment Grandpa heard these words, memories came flooding back from the depths of his mind. It was truly like a flood, and Grandpa found himself telling the chairman about the strange experience he had earlier without pause. However, he still couldn't remember what promise he had made. After hearing the story, the chairman said he had heard a similar tale before. "Well, it was actually from my grandfather when I was still a child. It's probably what they call a Kubire-oni. Some say it's the spirit of those who drowned in the river, but no one knows for sure. You'd better avoid that bridge for a while." Just as they were discussing this, a shout came from the entrance. "Chairman? Is the chairman here?" Tomita from the lumber shop came rushing in. "Chairman, it's terrible! Saburo has hanged himself!" Everyone was in an uproar. They decided to go to the scene immediately, planning to talk on the way. As everyone gathered at the shoe rack, Grandpa couldn't remember where he had placed his geta. The chairman laughed, saying, "You seem to be forgetting everything today," and Grandpa ended up borrowing a pair of geta from the shop to go with them. According to Tomita, Saburo had hanged himself from a zelk of a tree on the riverbank using his own obi. When Tomita was passing by, he saw a pair of feet dangling beneath the dense zelkova leaves. As everyone knows, zelkova trees have no low branches and grow straight up, making them difficult to climb without a ladder. Tomita approached, wondering if someone had been hired for pruning, and saw that the person had climbed the tree wearing geta. The name Kiyoshi was written on the heel of the geta. Hearing this, Grandpa couldn't help but let out a startled, "Huh?" You see, Grandpa's name was Kiyoshi. Responding to Grandpa's voice, Tomita continued, "Yes, at first I thought it was you, Kiyoshi, who had climbed up there. I called out, 'Kiyoshi, what are you doing? Who asked you to do this?' But when I looked up, it was Saburo hanging there. I was so shocked." Grandpa was terrified by this revelation and felt his legs weaken. He stopped walking, and the others naturally formed a circle around him to continue the conversation. Tomita went on, "It was horrifying. Saburo's face was as white as if all the blood had been drained from his body. And it wasn't just his face. His hanging feet were pure white too. I've been to many funerals, but I've never seen anyone who died looking like that." Grandpa felt his legs weaken and slowly lowered himself to the ground. The chairman then told everyone else to go ahead and help bring Saburo down, reminding them not to forget to borrow a ladder on the way. Left alone with Grandpa, the chairman said, It seems it really was a Kubire-oni after all. The demon that was haunting that place has now claimed Saburo instead of you. The Geta strap must have been the sign. It's well known that supernatural beings prey on human weaknesses. I'd guess the promise you made was something like, since I helped you with the strap, next time you'll give me a life in return. Grandpa felt a growing sense of unease in the pit of his stomach, and the world seemed to sway slightly around him. It should be safe for you to go near the river now, but you should stay here today, the chairman said before leaving to help the others. Even without being told, Grandpa was in no condition to help. He closed his eyes and lowered his head, waiting for the unsettling sensation to subside. After a while, he sensed someone standing next to him. Opening his eyes, he saw bare feet, gnarled, dry, thick toes with long, thick nails and the hem of a kimono. Without looking up, he knew it was the old woman. A voice came from above his head. Forsooth, despite our covenant most grave, 'tis a sore disappointment. Yon morsel was not half so toothsome. It was the old woman speaking in archaic language. It was a complaint. Suddenly, a gust of wind blew up, raising dust, and Grandpa instinctively turned his face away and closed his eyes. When he opened them again, the old woman was nowhere to be seen. After making such a firm promise, it's rather disappointing, isn't it? I'm afraid that one wasn't very palatable. In other words, it seems she had come to complain that Saburo's blood wasn't very delicious. Grandpa felt genuinely ill and vomited everything in his stomach. What came out was as black as the old woman's blood, gushing from his mouth. When everyone returned, Grandpa told them what had happened. They were surprised, but concluded that since he had vomited all the demon's blood that had entered his body, it must have truly left him. They felt sorry for Saburo, but everyone mentioned that he had a bad habit of pilfering things, and unfortunately, this time it had led to the worst possible outcome. I looked into it later and found out that the Kubire-oni, true to its name, is a malevolent yokai that possesses people and drives them to hang themselves. It's said that when possessed by this creature, one enters a dreamlike state and feels an overwhelming urge to fulfill its wish of, please hang yourself. The text also mentioned that if you ever feel a sudden desire to die near a riverbank, it might be the work of this yokai.